I don't know what answer I gave. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what they were, not what the restaurant was, not even what Marco said to me that last night with the cash folded into an envelope like a severance from a company that didn't officially exist. What I keep coming back to is Renata's face when I asked her how she'd lasted 11 years without being noticed, and what she said, and what I didn't say back, and the door closing behind me with that particular Caruso's sound. Heavy brass hardware. The catch, engaging in 2 stages, like it was built by someone who understood that some doors need to mean something when they shut. I keep coming back to that because she told me I'd given a different answer than she had, and I have no memory of being asked a question. That's the part I can't resolve. I've tried. I've gone back through the whole 6 weeks the way you go back through a conversation looking for the moment when the other person decided. Something about you, scanning for the pivot, the shift, the sentence that changed everything. And every time I get to the same conclusion, which is that I don't think there was a moment. I think it was slower than that and more complete. I think I was being read the entire time, the way you read a room when you walk into it. Not deliberately, not with any particular focus, just taking in what's there. I was what was there. I was in the room. That's what they do. That much I understand now. What I don't understand is what they concluded. I took the job at Caruso's in November, about 3 weeks after Danny and I ended things. I want to be precise about that because the sequencing matters. I wasn't in a state to make considered decisions. I was in the state where you take whatever job presents itself, where the primary criterion is that it fills the hours between 7 in the evening and 2 in the morning, because those are the hours that have become untenable in an empty apartment that used to have someone else's things in it. The hours between 7 and 2 are the hours when the absence is loudest. Work fills them. It doesn't matter what the work is. Danny and I had been together for 4 years. We weren't married. We weren't even officially living together. Danny kept an apartment across town that we laughed about, and neither of us ever admitted was a kind of insurance. But we spent 5 nights out of 7 in my place for 3 years, and then we spent 4 nights out of 7, and then fewer. And then it was the kind of relationship that exists as a conversation about itself, rather than as a thing being lived. We had the last conversation the last time, and then we had the kind of silence that is its own answer. I'm not telling this part to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling it because the state I was in when I walked into Caruso's is relevant. I was between versions of myself. I wasn't anyone's employee, anyone's partner, anyone's regular presence in any space. I was thoroughly, utterly transitional. I think that's important. I think that's possibly the whole thing. Caruso's is on Morden Street, in the kind of neighborhood that used to be Italian, and is now a mixture of Italian, Brazilian, and a late-stage gentrification that hasn't quite won yet. The restaurant has been there since 1961. The sign still says the same thing it said when a man named Caruso, nobody working there could tell me his first name, opened it the year Kennedy took office. The awning is green and white and has been repainted a certain number of times without ever changing. The inside smells like garlic and old wood and something underneath those things that I can only describe as duration. The smell that accumulates in a space that has been continuously occupied for decades. That's absorbed decades of conversation and heat and the particular pressure of human attention. It smells like a place that has been important to people for a long time. I knew what it was before I applied. Everyone in the neighborhood knows what Caruso's is. You don't grow up within 6 blocks of Morden Street without understanding that certain restaurants exist to serve 2 different functions, and that the second function has nothing to do with the food. I knew that men ate there whose business was not discussed in polite company, that the back tables were often occupied by people who preferred not to be photographed, that Marco, who now ran the place for reasons that were complicated and multi-generational and not entirely clear even to people who'd been tracking it. For years, was not simply a restaurant owner in the ordinary sense of that phrase. I knew all of this. I walked in anyway. I want to be clear about something. Working at a place like Caruso's is not what you'd imagine from the outside. The movies have given everyone a specific picture. Dark rooms, whispered conversations, envelopes changing hands in back booths while menacing men give meaningful looks at each other across plates of veal. The reality is that it's mostly a restaurant. A very good restaurant, actually. The kitchen is serious, and the food is taken seriously. And the regulars, the criminal regulars, the ones you might know from other contexts, they eat there because the food is excellent, and because they've been eating there since before you could legally drink, and because a place that has been part of your life since childhood has a claim on you regardless of what else it is. What I'm saying is, it's still just a restaurant. The criminality is infrastructure, not atmosphere. It runs underneath everything, invisible by intention, and you can work an entire shift and never encounter anything that would photograph as sinister. What you will encounter, if you work there long enough, is a different layer entirely. But I didn't know about that layer on the night I came in and asked about the server position, and Marco looked at me for a moment that was slightly longer than a hiring decision requires, and said, "You have experience?" And I said I'd waited tables through college, which was true. And he said, "You have a reason you need nights specifically?" And I said yes, not elaborating. And he looked at me again in that same measuring way and said, "Renata will train you. You start Thursday." Renata Vasquez had been at Caruso's for 11 years when I arrived. She was 43, dark-haired, with the kind of physical efficiency that comes from a decade plus of the same job in the same space. She moved through the dining room the way water moves through a familiar channel, without apparent effort, without the performance of effort that newer servers tend to produce. She was warm. That was the thing that surprised me most in those first days. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly warm. Not in a professional hospitality way, not in a way that was calibrated to her customers' comfort. Just warm. She asked about my life on the first night, and listened to the answers and remembered them the next night, without prompting. She recommended the Arabiata. She showed me where the extra wine keys were kept with the care of someone passing on something genuinely valuable. She trained me the way you train someone when you've been somewhere long enough to know exactly what the job actually is, as opposed to what it looks like from the outside. Which is to say, the training had 2 layers, and the second layer was delivered obliquely, embedded inside the first. So naturally that it took me almost a week to notice it as a separate thing. The first layer was the restaurant. Table numbers, the kitchen's timing on specific dishes, which regulars had dietary restrictions they'd never written down anywhere. How Marco liked the side work done at the end of the night, the wine list, the particular way the POS system failed on Tuesday nights when the internet connection dipped and what to do about it. Standard. Every restaurant has its own operating logic, and Caruso's was no different. The second layer I'd describe now as accommodation protocols. At the time, I just thought of them as the quirks of an old establishment. The first one I registered was the booth in the back left corner. Caruso's has 8 booths along the left wall and 6 tables in the center and 4 more along the right side near the bar. 7 of the 8 booths were in regular rotation. The 8th, the farthest back, tucked into the corner where the wall turns slightly inward and creates a kind of alcove, was never assigned. I assumed it was a structural issue. Bad sightline to the kitchen. Awkward geometry. Something. I asked Renata, on maybe the 3rd night, why we never seated anyone there. She said, "That one gets held," and moved to the next thing. And I let it go. That's the kind of answer you get from someone who's been somewhere 11 years. It's not evasive. It just doesn't require elaboration because to her the elaboration is obvious, and she's forgotten that it isn't obvious to you. The second thing I noticed was the music. Caruso's plays music, not loudly, from a system that looks like it was installed in approximately 2003 and hasn't been substantially updated since. The playlist is a shuffle of Italian standards, some American jazz, a few things that defy easy categorization, the kind of accumulated musical personality a place develops over decades, where someone long gone made certain additions that never got removed. Until 10 o'clock, Renata or I could change it if we wanted to. After 10, neither of us did. Not because anyone said not to. It was more that Renata didn't, and watching Renata was how I learned the job. So I didn't either. Later I asked her about it, and she said, after 10 the room is different. The music should be consistent. I thought she meant the clientele changed after 10. The criminal element tended to arrive later. I was right about the clientele, but wrong about the reason. The third thing, and this one she actually told me directly, though with the same naturalness she brought to everything, if someone comes in after midnight and sits down on their own, doesn't wait to be seated, just sits. Bring them water. Don't ask if they want anything. Don't offer the menu. Don't make eye contact. Leave the water and come back to the front and tell Renata. Or if Renata isn't there, tell Marco. If neither of them is there, it was a weekend with a skeleton crew. Then you go back to your work and you don't approach that table again until the person is gone. When they're gone, clear the glass with a clean cloth and don't think about it further. She said this while we were rolling silverware side by side at the server station, in the same calm voice she used to explain that the Table 7 regular always wanted fresh ground pepper but would never ask for it. So you should just bring it. Has that happened? I asked. Someone coming in after midnight and sitting themselves? It happens, she said. And you just bring them water. And you just bring them water. And they're... Who are they? Friends of Marco's? She rolled a fork and a knife into a linen napkin with a clean final fold and set it in the pile. I don't know whose friends they are, she said. I've been here 11 years, and I still don't know that. What I know is that the water is what's offered, so that's what you bring. At the time, I categorized this as, the restaurant has very high-end, very private clientele who value discretion, and the specific protocol is a form of aggressive non-intrusion. I had never worked anywhere with quite that protocol. But the logic of it, you're a server. You serve what's appropriate, not what you'd personally like to offer, wasn't hard to internalize. I internalized it. I moved on. The first one came in on my 9th night. The dinner rush had ended, and I was doing a kind of mental unwinding that servers do around 11. Still present, still covering the floor, but with the particular loosening that happens when the last real table has been walked to the door, and what's left is the maintenance work. The rolling, the polishing, the waiting for the handful of late stragglers to finish their drinks. Renata was in the back. Marco had gone upstairs to his office around 10. Two of the regulars, men I'd come to understand by their position in Caruso's social ecology, if not by their actual names, which were never offered and which I hadn't asked, were at the bar having a conversation in the kind of quiet that suggests the conversation is not for general consumption. I was behind the server station refilling the salt cellars when the front door opened, and someone walked in. The first thing I noticed was that they didn't pause. The second thing I noticed was where they went. Straight to the back left booth. No hesitation, no looking around, no performing the social gesture of assessing the room before choosing a seat. Straight there. The booth they chose was, of course, the one that was always held. I thought, new, doesn't know the protocol, probably connected in some way I haven't figured out yet. I thought, bring the water. I filled a glass from the bar's water pitcher and walked to the back. I kept my eyes down in the way Renata had described. Not dramatically, not obviously, just not offering eye contact. which is a thing servers learn to do anyway in restaurants where discretion is valued. You can move through a dining room tending to people while barely making direct eye contact with any of them. It's a practiced neutrality. I was grateful for the practice that night. I set the glass on the table. What I can tell you about those few seconds at the booth is limited, and I want to be honest about that limitation. I was looking at the table, at the glass, at the placement of my own hand. What I took in peripherally was a person sitting. The shape of a person sitting, still, very still. The kind of still that in most people would indicate deep thought or exhaustion, but which in this case didn't feel like either of those things. It felt like the stillness of something that doesn't move unless it has a reason to, the way a stone is still, rather than the way a tired person is still. There's a difference, and I can't make it more precise than that. There was a smell, faint, something mineral, something with a charge to it, not unpleasant, like the air just before rain breaks, the kind of smell that is more a sensation than a scent, that you feel in the back of the throat, rather than the nose. I walked back to the front. I told Renata, who had come out of the back by then. She looked toward the booth briefly, very briefly, and then looked back at me and said, "Good. You did it right." And that was all. At closing, I cleared the back booth. The water glass was empty. I hadn't seen it lifted. I hadn't seen anyone drink. The person was simply gone, in the way that people are gone when you weren't watching closely enough to see them leave. Which in a restaurant after midnight is not unusual. I wiped the glass with a clean cloth and put it in the bus bin, and did not think about it further, because Renata had told me not to and because the instruction suited me. There was something about that booth, even empty, that I didn't want to attend to more than necessary. The smell lingered for maybe 20 minutes, then it was just garlic and old wood again. By week 3, I had an understanding of Caruso's that I want to describe carefully. Because it was an understanding in layers, and each layer had a different quality of knowledge. The first layer was the restaurant as restaurant. I was good at this layer. I'm a competent server when I apply myself. And the specific mechanics of Caruso's had become comfortable, the timing, the regulars, the kitchen's rhythms. The way the weekend late crowd differed from the weekday late crowd. I was comfortable. The second layer was the restaurant as criminal infrastructure. I understood this in the way you understand weather. You know it's there. It affects conditions. It is not something you interact with directly. Men came in, some of whom I later identified by reputation, who were not there purely to eat. Conversations happened that were not for me. Occasionally, Marco would come downstairs and sit with someone for an hour, and the conversation would be the kind of thing that doesn't carry, even to the next table. I brought drinks, refilled bread, stayed in my lane. This layer required nothing from me except the practiced discretion I'd already developed. It was, in the most technical sense, simply clientele. What I understood about this second layer by week 3 was something that hadn't been obvious at the start. The men at those tables, the men I'd identified by neighborhood reputation as serious, as not to be interfered with, as the kind of people around whom you modulate your behavior automatically. They had a particular way of behaving in the restaurant. Correct, measured, polite to the staff in the specific way that powerful people are sometimes polite to service workers, which is a form of control just like rudeness is a form of control, but which I'd been grateful for anyway. They were good customers in the technical sense. But there was a thing I'd started to notice, and I noticed it fully on a Thursday in week 3 when the booth in the back left corner had an occupant. Another midnight arrival, whom I'd brought water to without incident, and who sat there in that terrible stillness while the night finished out. And 2 of the regulars were at the bar. One of them was a man I'll call Vito, because I never knew his real name, and Vito captures something true about him. about the specific gravity he carried. Vito was the kind of person who changed a room when he entered it, not through drama, just through the simple fact of what he was. The weight of it. I had seen him, over 3 weeks, manage the social space of the bar with absolute unconscious authority. He sat where he wanted. He spoke when he wanted. Other people's conversations adjusted around him. That night, when the midnight occupant was in the back booth, Vito turned his chair. It was subtle. It was not a dramatic gesture. He shifted, ostensibly, to face his companion better, and in doing so, he oriented his back toward the booth, in the back left corner. His companion did the same, following Vito's lead the way people do around someone like Vito. Without appearing to think about it, they continued their conversation, but the turn was deliberate. I was certain of it. The angle of it, the finality of it. Vito had placed his back to that booth with the same intentionality with which he did everything. And the intentionality was not about his companion. It was about what was sitting 40 feet behind him. I brought Vito his drink. He thanked me without looking at me. His attention, what there was of it, was directed at his companion and at whatever they were discussing. But underneath that attention was something else, a very slight, very controlled quality of awareness, like a man who is in a room with something he has decided not to look at, and has made that decision with enough practice that it no longer costs him anything. I went back to the server station. I thought about what I had seen. And then, because I was 3 weeks into a job I had not taken with any particular care, and because I was still in the emotional aftermath of 4 years ending, and because I had the survival intelligence of someone who has learned which things not to tug at, I put it in a category labeled approximately, "This place is strange," and that is the deal I made, and I left it there. I was good at leaving things there. I'd been practicing for 3 weeks. Week 4 was when Renata and I started having the kind of conversations that exist outside the job. That sounds like a small shift. It wasn't. When I say Renata was warm, I don't mean she was effusive. She was warm in the way that some people are warm when they have been somewhere long enough to stop performing and start existing. She asked real questions and waited for real answers and connected what you told her to what you'd told her before. On a Tuesday night, deep in a slow week, we were doing side work together at 11:30 with the last table polishing off dessert. And she asked me about Danny in a way that suggested she'd been holding the question for a while, waiting for the right opening. I told her more than I'd told most people. The 4 years, the slow unwinding, the apartment that Danny had kept across town as a kind of parachute, the final conversation, and then the silence. Renata listened. She said, "You're not over it." Not as a question, not as criticism, just as observation, stated with the same matter-of-factness she brought to everything. "Not entirely," I said. "That's okay," she said. "Being in between is its own kind of state. It's not a failure of the transition. It's just where you are." I thought about that for a while. We finished the side work. The last table left. I ran their credit card and walked them to the door, and came back to find Renata wiping down the bar with the particular efficiency that meant she was also thinking. "You've been here 11 years, I said. "I have." "That's a long time to be at one restaurant." "It is." "Do you ever think about leaving?" She set down the bar cloth and looked at me with an expression I didn't fully know how to read at the time. There was something in it that was fond, and something that was also precise, like a calculation she'd already finished. "I thought about it once," she said. "I don't anymore." What changed? I understood what I was part of. She picked up the bar cloth again. Understanding changes the question. It's not about wanting to leave anymore. It's about what it means to stay. I thought she was talking about the criminal element, about having been here long enough to be inside it in some structural way that made leaving complicated. That interpretation seemed reasonable. That was the interpretation I ran with for another week. I'm going to tell you about the night I got a real look at one of them, because I've been circling it, and I should just say it. It was week 5, a Friday, which at Caruso's meant a full dining room until 10, and then a different crowd after. I was covering the floor alone that night. Renata had left at 10, some family thing. Marco was upstairs. It was just me in the kitchen, which went dark at 11, and then just me. At 12:40, a figure came through the front door. This one I almost looked at directly. Not because I intended to. I'd been following the protocol without thinking. Eyes down, glass of water, leave. But because something happened with the geography of my approach that put my face briefly at the wrong angle. I was coming around the end of the bar toward the booth, and I looked up at the wrong moment. And for 2 seconds, maybe 3, I saw. I'm going to describe what I saw as accurately as I can, which means I'm going to describe something that is not coherent in the way descriptions usually are. What I saw was a person, dressed plainly, dark coat, nothing distinctive. The height was within the normal human range. The face was there, in the sense that there was a face with the arrangements that faces have. I don't want to make this sound grotesque, because it wasn't. It wasn't monstrous in the movie sense. What it was, the best word I have, is assembled. Like something that had assembled the components of a person with great precision, but from a position of studying rather than living. The way a very good tailor can construct a suit that fits perfectly but has a particular quality that reveals it wasn't made for that specific body. It was made to be correct, and correct is not the same as native. The face had that quality. It had done the work. It had gotten everything right, and the getting everything right was visible. The eyes were looking at the table when I placed the glass, and I was grateful for that. I do not think I would have managed anything meaningful if they had been looking at me. I walked back to the front. My hands were fine. My breathing was fine. I was not panicked, which surprised me. I want to use the word calibrated. Like something in me had taken in the information and filed it efficiently. No excess fear, no shutdown, just a clean recording of, that is not what I thought it was, and I will need to think about what it is instead. I didn't think about it for the rest of that shift, not because I was suppressing it, because there was nothing to do with it. I had brought the water. I had done what was appropriate. There was no next step that was mine to take. At closing, I cleared the booth. The glass was empty again. The smell this time was stronger. That pre-rain, mineral, electric quality, and underneath it something I can only describe as depth. The way standing at the edge of a very deep place has a quality to the air above it that registers in the body before the mind. It faded. I wiped the glass with a clean cloth and put it in the bus bin and went home. I lay in bed for a while before sleeping. I thought about Renata. I thought about the phrase she'd used. Understanding changes the question, and about the fact that she'd been there 11 years and had said it as though the understanding had arrived and then settled and was no longer a source of disturbance, as though whatever the understanding was, it had become habitable. I thought, I want to ask her. I thought, I will ask her. I asked her the following Tuesday, after close. while we were doing the final counts and Marco had already gone upstairs. I told her what I'd seen, not with the heightened language I'm using now. I was careful, almost underplaying it. The way you underplay something you're not sure will be believed. She didn't react with surprise. She listened, with the particular quality of attention she had that meant she was tracking your words precisely. Not for subtext, but for accuracy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long ago did you get here, when you first came to work here? What state were you in?" I told her, the Danny situation, the empty apartment, the transitional state. She nodded. "That happens a lot," she said. "The ones who take this job, especially the night shift, there's a pattern to them. Not always, but often. People between things. People who are temporarily without a defined shape, if that makes sense. People who are in the middle of becoming something without knowing yet what it is. Renata, I'm telling you what I know," she said. "Let me tell it." I let her tell it. The building, she told me, had been something before it was Caruso's, before the 1961 opening, before the two businesses that occupied the ground floor in the decades before that. The building had been something else, and before the building there had been the land, and the land had a particular quality that she couldn't entirely explain but which she described as permeable. I want to be careful with that word, because she used it deliberately. Permeable. Like certain materials that don't stop things from passing through but slow them. Hold them briefly in the membrane before releasing them on the other side. She said, certain things move through the world in ways that aren't continuous. They move in stages. Between one stage and the next, they need somewhere to be, not to stop exactly, but to be still for a period without being in either place they're moving between. Places that are permeable serve as those intervals. The building on Morden Street had been one of those intervals since before anyone now living could remember. What are they? I asked. What are the things that come through? She looked at me with patience and something else. An affection that was also the tiniest bit sad. The way you feel affection for someone who is asking a question that can only be answered partially. I don't know, she said. I have never known. 11 years, and I have never asked that directly, because the right question isn't what they are, it's what they need. And what they need is exactly what we provide. Somewhere to be still. Water. No demands. No documentation. No one looking at them with anything that registers as threat or intention. The gangsters, I said. The regulars. They know, or their predecessors always knew. The families that have run this place have known since before the families that run it now. It's part of why the restaurant has lasted. It's part of why nobody who has ever worked here in a serious capacity has ever been seriously harmed. The protection is real. It's just not from the source people assume. She let that sit. The booth, I said, the one in the back left corner, has been held for as long as the restaurant has been a restaurant. The layout has changed twice since 1961. That booth has never moved. And the music after 10. It helps, she said. Consistency helps. The same music, the same light level, the same smells. You're maintaining a space with a specific quality. You're doing maintenance on a kind of atmosphere. The way you'd maintain anything. Why midnight specifically? The intervals happen at specific times. I don't know why. It's a thing you observe over time, the same way you know, after a while, which days are heavy and which days aren't. There's a rhythm. I've stopped thinking of it as strange and started thinking of it as seasonal. There was a long pause. The restaurant was entirely quiet around us. The kind of quiet that good buildings have when everyone is gone. Full rather than empty, the way a held breath is full. Renata, I said, you said once that the hard part isn't the ones that come in. You said the hard part is when one of them notices you. She looked at me, and the expression she had was calm and careful, and the sadness I'd seen before was more present now, more visible. Yes, she said. Have I been noticed? The pause before she answered was not long. It was precise. Yes, she said. I want to describe what that word did. In that room. In that moment. It wasn't fear. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect fear to be the response, and I understand why they'd expect that. But what I felt was something that I'd compare to the specific vertigo of having a thing you suspected confirmed. Not the confirmation itself as new information, but the sudden loss of the ambiguity you'd been using to stay functional. The ambiguity goes, and what replaces it is a very clear, very calm, very total understanding of your situation. Clarity, without relief. That's what it was. I had been noticed, one of the things that moved through the interval at Caruso's. That sat in the held booth with its terrible stillness and its smell of coming rain, had directed something like attention at me. Not at the restaurant generally, not at Renata or Marco or the criminal regulars who had built their accommodation protocols over generations. At me. Specifically, the new one. The transitional one. The one between shapes. Renata saw my face. She said, "You're not in danger." I want to be clear about that. Being noticed isn't the same as being at risk. These things don't harm. They don't have that kind of interest in the people around them, usually. What they have is something more like awareness. Like you've been registered. Cataloged in some way I can't explain. It just means you've entered a record that I can't see and don't know the contents of. That's supposed to be reassuring? I said. No, she said. It's supposed to be true. I sat with that for a while. Outside, Morden Street was doing what Morden Street does at 1 a.m. in November. Quiet. Yellow lit. The occasional car, the kind of city quiet that is never fully silent. I thought about the thing I'd seen when I looked up at the wrong moment. The assembled face. The eyes directed at the table. I thought about the times I'd walked to that booth with a glass of water and maintained the practiced neutrality of eyes down. Leave the water, walk away. And whether on any of those approaches the eyes had been directed at the table because they were waiting for me to arrive and were politely, deliberately, giving me the courtesy of not being looked at. I thought, how many times? I asked Renata, when it happens, when someone is noticed, what usually follows? Usually, she said, nothing that affects the person directly. They keep working. They see the things that come in. They maintain the protocols. Their lives continue. Sometimes people are here for years after being noticed, and nothing happens. And sometimes the thing that noticed them communicates something about them to Marco, or I don't know exactly how it works. Marco knows. I've only seen it happen twice in 11 years. Both times the person was let go. Let go how? Marco sits them down, pays them, tells them their time here is finished, is very kind about it, and then they're not here anymore. What happened to them afterward? The two who were let go. She looked at me. One of them moved cities, she said. I heard she's fine. Has a family now. Normal life. The other one, I don't know. He left and I didn't hear from him. That's 2 different outcomes. Outcomes I know of, she said. Which isn't the same as all the outcomes. There was something in the way she said it, careful and neutral and not quite reassuring, that told me she had thought about this deeply and had arrived at a position that was not comfortable, but was livable. She had made her accommodation with the uncertainty. She was, as she had said, part of something she understood. Understanding had changed the question. I asked her the question I'd been building toward, without knowing I'd been building toward it. Since the very first night I'd watched her in this restaurant and registered the quality of her comfort here. I asked her, "How do you stay? How do you work here for 11 years with this underneath it, and not what? Not leave, not break, not I was noticed too," she said simply. "A long time ago, I was given a choice about what to do with that. I chose to stay. I understood what I was staying for, and I made that choice clearly, and now it's just my life. It's not frightening anymore. It's just what is." "What choice were you given?" She smiled, and the smile was genuine and warm, and also entirely her own thing. "In no way for me. That's between me and whatever asked," she said. 3 nights later, Marco sat me down. He came and found me on the floor at 10:30, which was unusual. Marco generally did his business from upstairs and communicated through Renata, unless something required his direct presence. When he touched my arm and said, "Can I get a few minutes?" I understood immediately that this was not about a scheduling issue or a complaint from a table. We went to the corner near the host stand. He was wearing, as he always was, something between a suit and not. Good fabric, no tie. The particular ease of a man who is always dressed for the most important conversation in whatever room he enters. He wasn't cold, and he wasn't warm. He was precise. "I'm going to let you go," he said. "I want to say that first so you're not wondering what this conversation is." I said nothing. Whatever it wrote down about me, in whatever record exists, I'm in there. Under a category I don't know the name of, with an answer I didn't know I gave, serving as a data point in a system whose purpose I was never told. And tonight is quiet. The apartment is quiet. The city outside is doing what it does. And I am here. Whatever here means, after Caruso's. Whatever here means, now. I've been home for 6 weeks now, and the apartment doesn't feel the same way it did before. Though I can't find a specific change to attribute to. The absence of Danny that was so loud in November is quieter now. Not gone, but repositioned. Further back. I've been sleeping differently. More, actually. And more solidly. Which is not what I would have predicted. I've started looking for a different job. Something day shift. Something with different hours. And there's a specific kind of deliberateness in that choice that I recognize as something new in me, some quality of intention that wasn't there before. I don't know if that's mine. I don't know if the 6 weeks at Caruso's and what happened at the end of them changed something in me in some way. I'm only now measuring, or if I'm just in a different part of the transition, and this is simply what that looks like, the slow emergence of a new shape. I don't go near Morden Street. I've thought about Renata often. The warmth of her, the way she moved through the restaurant with that complete, unperformed ease, the hug at the door, and the final words and the expression on her face that was sad for me in the specific way you're sad for someone when you understand their situation more fully than they do, but the sadness is not pity. It's just the recognition of a difference. She stayed. I'm outside. She knew both outcomes were possible, and she isn't grieving mine. I hope she's all right. I think she is. I think she's exactly all right, in the booth wiping, music maintaining, water bringing way that she has always been. And I think the interval on Morden Street is functioning correctly, and I think things are still passing through. And I think the booth in the back left corner is still held, set, and waiting for whatever arrives next in the space between one place and another. I just don't know what I am to it now. I know that Renata said go home, and I know she meant it with the warmth she had for me, and also with the precision she brought to everything. And that precision encoded, this is the last instruction, and it is the one that matters most, and following it correctly is the final thing you can do here. Go home. I stood on Morden Street for another moment. Then I started walking. The city around me was the city, doing what cities do at 3 a.m, existing in its reduced, honest form, without the performance of daytime, just the infrastructure and the residue and the occasional person moving through it, for reasons that are their own. I passed other buildings, other fronts, other interiors, other histories folded into brickwork and old glass. A city is made of intervals. A city is made of spaces between things. I had never thought of it that way before, and I could not stop thinking of it now. I thought, how many of these buildings hold something still? I thought, what are they assessing? I thought, whether I will ever know what I answered, whether the answer changes as I change, whether there is a version of me that would have been given a different determination. I did not think in loops. I did not spiral. I walked home in the cold, with the envelope in my pocket, and my breath visible in the air ahead of me, and I was, I want to say, intact. Still myself. Still the same person who had walked into Caruso's 6 weeks ago looking for a way to fill the hours between 7 and 2. What was different was that something else also knew I existed. It had looked at what I was and found it legible and made a note and sent me outside. I don't know what the note says. I was, at the time of my employment at Caruso's, and at every moment of those 6 weeks, and at the moment of the assessment, and at this moment, on Morden Street in the cold, transitional, between things, without fixed shape. Not knowing what I was becoming, moving away from 4 years of a life that had organized me toward something I hadn't yet identified, a person without a native weight, for the time being, a person with 1 foot in a previous version of themselves and no foot yet planted in whatever comes next. That's what the answer had been. Not the answer I gave, the answer I was. And the decision that answer produced was outside. I don't know if that's protection. I don't know if the outside is safer than the inside, or if safety is even the relevant question. What I know is that something that moves through the intervals of the world made a determination about what I am, and where I belong, and where I don't, and the place I don't belong is Caruso's. I know that whatever she is, whatever quality of solidity, of rootedness, of having made her permanent accommodation, with a place and a purpose, it was legible to something that makes these assessments. And the answer was yes, and she's still there. I know that I don't know what the question was. I know that I can't go back to find out because Marco told me not to come back to the block, and I have understood the practical dimensions of ignoring instructions from that quarter, and also, beyond the practical, I have understood something that I think is true in a way that doesn't require further investigation. The answer was given, the decision was made, and the going back to find out would be a challenge to a determination that I have no grounds to challenge. The thing that decided knows what it decided and why. I do not have comparable information. Morden Street at 3 a.m. is not dark. There are streetlights. There is the ambient glow of a city that never fully sleeps. There is the light from the apartments above the shops. But it has the particular emptiness of a street that has recently been full. The impression of earlier presence. The tables in the restaurant across the street, still set, visible through the window. A car parked at an angle that suggests the owner will be back shortly. I stood on the sidewalk in front of Caruso's with the envelope in my coat pocket and the cold November air on my face, and I did not move for a moment that was probably longer than I thought it was. What I was understanding standing there was this: something that exists in a category I have no reliable language for had been present in the same building as me, repeatedly, over 6 weeks. It had been aware of me. It had directed something like attention at me. Not threat. Not predation. Something more like assessment. The way you assess what something is when its nature is relevant to a decision you need to make. And it had made the decision. The decision was, this one leaves. I had been expelled. Not as a punishment, not as a mercy, as a determination. The word that kept surfacing for what I felt, standing there, was categorized. I had been put in a category. The category was outside, not inside the interval, not one of the permanent staff, not someone whose nature made continued presence sensible. Outside. I had been returned to the outside as a matter of logic, I suppose. The logic of a system I had glimpsed but hadn't entered. Or hadn't entered entirely, or had entered in some way that the system had assessed and found temporary. I thought about Renata. I'm someone who is here. I belong to this place. Not passing through. I thought about what I was. I said, the one that asked about me. Did it? Is there something I should know about what it decided? He looked at me for a moment. The fact that you're walking out is the thing it decided, he said. That's not a small thing. Try to carry it that way. I put on my coat. Renata was at the end of the bar. She came to me when she saw me heading for the door, and she hugged me. A real hug, the full weight kind, both arms, longer than you'd expect from someone you'd known for 6 weeks. I held it for a moment. Then I pulled back. Renata, I said, tell me how you did 11 years, how you got noticed and stayed. She looked at me. That expression again, fond and precise, and with the sadness that was for me, not for herself, because she had long since made her peace. I was noticed, and I stayed. She said, that's both parts of the answer. The question they asked me, I don't know how to translate it exactly, but it was something like, what are you? And the answer I gave, the honest one, is that I'm someone who is here. I belong to this place. I'm not passing through. That answer let me stay. She paused. The question they asked you, she said. I don't know what it was, but the answer you gave was different. I didn't know I was answering anything, I said. You don't, she said. That's how it works. The answer is always what you are, not what you say. You don't choose the answer. You just have it. She touched my arm briefly. Go home. The door closed behind me with its double catch, the brass hardware finding its seat, the two-stage sound of something properly closed. A little while, she said. Marco knew before I did, but I could see it, the last week or so, the way the booth oriented when you were working. Very slightly. Like the way you'd lean toward a conversation you wanted to hear. I thought about this for a longer moment than I should have, standing at the server station with a clean linen cloth in my hand. They lean toward the conversation, I said, but they don't initiate one. No, She said, "They never do." Then how is a question asked? How does Marco know what was asked? She was quiet for a moment. "You should ask Marco that," she said. "I've thought about the answer and I don't think my version is reliable. I didn't ask Marco. I don't know why. Maybe because some questions are the kind you keep intact, unanswered, because the asking of them is more useful than whatever answer you'd receive. At 1:55, I did my last side work. At 2:15, the kitchen was locked. At 2:45, the last glass was polished and racked, and the floor was swept, and the coffee was off, and the music was, as it always was after 10, still playing, a version of Casta Diva I had heard enough times to have the particular recording memorized. Every catch in the old vinyl transfer, every slight irregularity in the tempo, the way the soprano's voice opened on the high notes into something that sounded like grief, made structural, made architectural, raised into the air and held. Marco came down with the envelope. He handed it to me. He shook my hand. His grip was firm, and his eye contact was direct, and there was in his face the thing I'd seen the night he'd told me. The relief. Still present. "Complicated," he said. "I'm sorry it's a short run." He said, "You were good here." He said, "Don't come back to this block." The last one, he said with the same precision and kindness as everything else, but it landed differently. That I know of. About 23 years. Before my time, my uncle handled this part of it. Before him, his father. The thing itself, how long it's been, I don't know. The building is old. Does it happen often? Being asked about? "You're the third," he said, "in 23 years. He said it like it should make me feel chosen, and I think he intended it that way. Not manipulation, just the fact, offered as a thing that might help. I don't know if it helped. I don't know what being third means inside a system I still can't fully see. I finished out the shift. I worked the floor with Renata the way we'd worked it every other night. And she was with me through all of it, bringing drinks, running food, talking at the server station in the low way you talk when the restaurant is quiet and you're both just maintaining the space together. She didn't make it strange. She didn't treat me as though something momentous was in progress. She just worked beside me, the way she always had, warm and precise, and entirely herself. And I was grateful for that in a way I couldn't have articulated then, and can barely articulate now. The midnight patrons that night. 1. The booth in the back left corner. I had thought that Marco might handle it, or that I'd be excused from it, or that on this particular last night something different would happen. Nothing different happened. The figure came in at 12:50, and I brought water, and I set it down, and I walked away. I kept my eyes on the glass, on the table, on my own hands. I did not feel the attention I'd been told I'd attracted. I did not feel examined. I felt only the pocket of silence that existed around that booth, and the smell, and the particular quality of stillness that I had stopped trying to name, and had simply learned to recognize. At the server station afterward, Renata said, "You did it right. You always did it right." "How long have you known?" I asked. That they were asking about me. "Your last shift is tonight. I'll give you your pay. All of it. Plus the 2 weeks we'd owe you with proper notice. In cash. Tonight before you leave. I want you to know this is not about your performance. You've been excellent." He paused. And in the pause there was something that I read. Then and now, as a man choosing his words not for effect but for accuracy, something asked about you. When that happens, when one of them asks about a person here, the answer we give is that they can't come back. That's the answer. It's not because you've done something wrong. It's the policy. Something asked about me. I said, yes. What was the question? He looked at me with genuine something. I want to call it regret, but it was more than that. It was the expression of a person who has inherited a system they didn't build, and who has made peace with it, and who, occasionally, encounters the moment when that peace costs someone else something. I don't know the content of the question, he said. I know that asking happened, and I know what asking means for the answer we give. That's all I know. And if I don't leave, if I kept coming in, then something that has been leaving you alone would not be leaving you alone anymore. He said it very quietly. I've never tested the next part of that. I don't intend to. I thought about this. I thought about the booth in the back left corner, and the water glasses emptied without anyone seen drinking, and the terrible stillness. And Vito turning his chair with its small, deliberate finality, and the smell of rain before rain. How long has this been happening? I asked, the asking about people,